I never thought I'd be the type of person to lock someone in my garage, but Diane Matthews from the Oak Ridge Heights Homeowners Association gave me no choice. I'd lived in this neighborhood for 3 peaceful years before she was elected president of the HOA, and things had gone downhill ever since. Diane, or Karen as everyone secretly called her, ran our community like her personal fiefdom, using the HOA rulebook as her Bible and weapon of choice. Her perfectly highlighted blonde bob was like a warning beacon that trouble was approaching, and her perpetual "may I speak to the manager" expression had become the stuff of neighborhood nightmares. It all started when I accepted a position as the new 5th grade science teacher at Oak Ridge Elementary. I was excited to be working just 5 minutes from home, and I spent the summer transforming my garage into a makeshift laboratory where I could prepare engaging experiments for my students. I had set up tables, purchased equipment, and even installed special shelving units to organize materials. I painted the walls a bright blue, added proper lighting, and even installed a small sink with running water for experiments. My garage had become the perfect prep space for creating memorable learning experiences, and I was proud of the transformation. Everything was perfect until the first day of school, when I discovered that Diane's son Tyler was assigned to my class. Tyler was a good kid at heart, but clearly influenced by his mother's entitled attitude. He mentioned during our first class that his mom was in charge of making sure everyone followed the rules in our neighborhood, with such pride that I immediately made the connection. My stomach sank as I realized my garage laboratory might soon be on her radar. During our first parent-teacher night, Diane cornered me with an intense smile that didn't reach her eyes. She wore an expensive-looking blazer with gold buttons that matched her oversized earrings, and her posture screamed authority. "So nice to finally meet you," she said, extending a manicured hand with a grip that was just a bit too tight. "I've heard so much about the new teacher who's violating Section 8, Paragraph 3 of our neighborhood covenant." I blinked in confusion as she continued, her voice dripping with false concern. "Residential garages are not to be used for commercial purposes," she said with a practiced sweetness. "Running a business from your home requires special permission from the board, which you don't have." When I explained that I was simply preparing materials for my teaching job, not running a business, she waved her hand dismissively. "Teaching materials, inventory for an illegal home business. Semantics, really. You have 7 days to convert your garage back to its intended purpose." I tried to reason with her, explaining that I wasn't making any profit from my garage lab, it was purely for educational purposes. But reasoning with Diane was like trying to nail Jell-O to a wall. "Rules are rules," she said, with that same artificial smile. "I don't make exceptions, not even for teachers. After all, what kind of example would it set for the children if their teachers don't follow the rules?" That comment, delivered with such smug self-righteousness, made my blood boil, but I maintained my composure, smiled politely, and assured her I would review the covenant. What I didn't tell her was that I had already read it cover to cover before moving in, and I knew there was nothing explicitly prohibiting my garage lab. The commercial purposes clause was intended for people running retail shops or repair services, not teachers preparing classroom materials. What followed was 3 months of escalating harassment. First came the official warning letters, printed on expensive paper with the HOA letterhead, appearing in my mailbox every few days. Each one cited different alleged violations, from improper use of residential space to potential hazardous material storage. Then came the daily drive-bys, where she'd slow down in front of my house, making notes on her clipboard with exaggerated movements clearly designed to intimidate me. She'd park across the street, watching my house for hours on weekends, documenting everyone who came and went. Once I even caught her standing in my driveway taking photos of my garage door with her phone. When I confronted her, she didn't even have the decency to appear embarrassed. She simply said she was documenting violations for the HOA records, and then asked if I was still conducting illegal business activities. My neighbors started giving me sympathetic looks, a few even warning me that I'd become Diane's latest project. Apparently, she picked a new target every few months. Someone whose property she deemed in violation of her precious rules. The situation reached a breaking point when I arrived home one Friday afternoon to find a $2,000 fine taped to my front door for continued operation of an unauthorized business. The notice stated that the fine would double every 30 days until the violation was corrected. I was furious, but determined not to let her win. The following Monday, I raised the issue at the school board meeting, where Diane, conveniently, was also a member. The meeting room fell silent when I stood up during the public comments section. Several teachers gave me encouraging nods. Apparently, I wasn't the first staff member to have issues with Diane. I'd like to address an ongoing situation that's affecting my ability to prepare quality educational materials for our students, I began, my voice steadier than I expected. For the past 3 months, I've been harassed by a member of this very board over using my garage to prepare science experiments for my class. I've reviewed the neighborhood covenant thoroughly, I said, addressing the entire room but keeping my eyes locked on Diane's. There's nothing prohibiting a teacher from preparing classroom materials at home. This harassment needs to stop. Several other teachers nodded in agreement, and I could see Diane's face reddening as the school principal, Mr. Gonzalez, asked her to explain her action. Backed into a corner, Diane did what Karens do best. She doubled down. "This isn't about teaching," she snapped, her pleasant facade cracking. "It's about neighborhood property values and adherence to community standards. Perhaps the school board should be more careful about who they hire." The room fell silent at her thinly veiled threat, and I knew this was no longer just about my garage. She was implying that she could make trouble for me professionally if I didn't comply with her demands. After the meeting, several colleagues approached me, sharing their own stories about Diane's overreach. One teacher had been targeted for having a little free library in her front yard. Another had faced fines for parking his car in his own driveway overnight because it was an eyesore. Mr. Gonzalez pulled me aside and whispered, "Don't back down. We need more documentation of her behavior. She's been making life difficult for staff and parents for too long." The next day, I installed security cameras around my property, a decision that would prove crucial in the days to come. I positioned them strategically, one overlooking my driveway, another pointing at my garage door, and a third capturing the side entrance to the garage, all fed directly to an app on my phone with motion detection alerts. I also consulted with a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes. He assured me that Diane was overstepping her authority, and we drafted a formal cease and desist letter. But before I could deliver it, things took an unexpected turn. That Saturday morning, I was at the local coffee shop grading papers when my phone buzzed with a security alert. Someone was at my garage. I opened the app and couldn't believe what I was seeing. Diane Matthews, in her designer pantsuit and pearls, was trying to peer through my garage windows. She cupped her hands around her eyes, pressing her face against the glass, trying to see inside. When she couldn't get a good view, she walked around to the side door and tried the handle. To my horror, it opened. I'd forgotten to secure it after taking out the recycling earlier. I watched in disbelief as she entered my garage without permission. This wasn't just HOA overreach anymore. This was breaking and entering. I immediately called the non-emergency police line, explaining the situation. "I'm heading home now," I told the dispatcher. "But please, send someone quickly. I have her on video breaking into my property." As I rushed home, I continued monitoring the security feed. Diane was rummaging through my teaching supplies, taking photos and opening drawers. She picked up beakers and test tubes, examining them with a triumphant expression, as if she'd discovered illegal contraband. She rifled through my lesson plans, taking pictures of each page. My blood boiled at this invasion of privacy, but then an idea struck me. My garage had an automatic security feature once the main door closed. It could only be opened from the inside with a keypad code, or from the outside with the remote in my car. The side door had a deadbolt that automatically locked when closed. I pulled into my driveway, careful to park where Diane wouldn't see me through the small garage windows. I took out my phone and activated the garage door through the app. I heard the mechanical whir as the main door closed, followed by Diane's surprised exclamation. "What the?" She tried the side door but found it locked. She was trapped. I calmly walked to the front of my house and waited for the police. watching Diane through my security app as she realized her predicament. She pounded on the garage door, then tried calling someone, probably her husband or another HOA board member. When that didn't work, she started taking more photos, likely trying to gather evidence against me to justify her trespassing. Through the camera, I could see her face cycling through emotions, confusion, anger, and finally panic as she realized the severity of her actions. 10 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up. Officer Jenkins, a middle-aged man with a no-nonsense attitude, listened attentively as I explained the situation. "She entered my property without permission," I said, showing him the security footage on my phone. "I have it all recorded, including her trying the door and letting herself in. She's been harassing me for months over my garage setup, which doesn't violate any actual rules." Officer Jenkins nodded grimly. "Let's go have a chat with her, shall we?" I used my remote to open the garage door, revealing a flustered Diane who immediately launched into an explanation before the door was fully open. "Officer, thank goodness you're here. This teacher has been running an illegal business from his garage, violating multiple HOA regulations, and now he's imprisoned me against my will." Her voice rose with each word, her face flushed with indignation. She pointed at my science equipment with a shaking finger. "Look at all this. This is clearly a commercial operation in a residential zone." Officer Jenkins remained impressively stoic. "Ma'am, do you have a warrant to enter this property?" he asked, his voice calm but authoritative. Diane blinked rapidly, momentarily thrown off her script. "I don't need a warrant. I'm the HOA president and I have authority to inspect properties for covenant violations." She pulled out a laminated HOA ID card from her purse, holding it up as if it granted her special powers. "Actually, you don't," I interjected, holding up my phone. "I've spoken with my attorney. HOA presidents can issue citations for visible violations, but they cannot enter private property without explicit permission from the homeowner. You broke the law, Diane." Officer Jenkins reviewed the footage again, then turned to Diane. "Ma'am, you clearly entered this property without permission. That constitutes breaking and entering and potentially trespassing." He took out his notepad and began writing. "I'll need to take your statement, and then we'll need to discuss whether Mr. Jackson here wants to press charges." Diane's confident demeanor crumbled. "This is absurd. I was performing my duties as HOA president. The school board will hear about this harassment of a board member." But her threats sounded hollow now, even to her own ears. She looked around the garage, suddenly seeing it not as evidence of my wrongdoing, but as the scene of her crime. "Those cameras are an invasion of privacy," she tried, grasping at straws. "The HOA has strict rules about surveillance equipment." "On my own property? I don't think so," I replied calmly. "And even if there were such rules, they wouldn't justify breaking and entering." I decided to press charges, partly out of principle, and partly because I knew it was the only way to end her harassment once and for all. As Officer Jenkins escorted her to his cruiser to take her statement, I heard him say, "You know, my wife is on the school board. I'm sure she'll be very interested to hear about a board member breaking into a teacher's home." The aftermath was swift and satisfying. Diane was charged with criminal trespassing and breaking and entering. She hired an expensive lawyer who managed to get her a plea deal, but she still had to pay a $5,000 fine and perform 100 hours of community service, ironically, at the very school where I taught. Every time she came in to sort books in the library or clean equipment in the science lab, she would avoid eye contact with me, her face burning with humiliation. The real karma, though, came from the school board and the HOA. An emergency meeting was called where both groups reviewed the security footage I provided. The footage was damning, showing Diane not just entering my property illegally, but methodically searching through my personal and professional belongings. The school board voted unanimously to remove Diane from her position, citing ethical violations and conduct unbecoming of a board member. Mr. Gonzalez, our principal, personally apologized to me for the harassment I'd endured and offered to fund additional science equipment for my classroom as a show of support. But the sweetest victory came from the HOA itself, the very organization Diane had wielded as a weapon. At their next meeting, they voted to remove her as president, and amended the covenant to include explicit language protecting homeowners from overreaching board members. The vote wasn't even close, 18-1, with only Diane's husband standing by her side. I'll never forget the look on Diane's face as the vote results were announced. Pure shock giving way to the slow realization that her reign of terror was over. When the new HOA president, a retired judge with a firm belief in due process, formally announced that Diane Matthews was removed from her position, effective immediately, she sat frozen in her chair, her perfectly styled hair and designer outfit suddenly seeming like costume pieces from a role she'd never play again.